few days after the Monaco race, it was time for another of the most prestigious motor races in the world, the Indianapolis 500. This 69th edition ended up being one of the most famous in the history of the race. At just over half distance, Mario Andretti was leading Danny Sullivan, and the ex-Tyrrell driver passed the ex-champion for the lead, only to lose his back end and spin, missing both Andretti and the wall, completing a full 360-degree spin at nearly 200 miles an hour and continuing on his way. This brought out the yellow flags, and both drivers made tyre stops. Then another accident brought out the yellows again, but once they got back to racing, Sullivan took the lead once more and started to pull away, eventually taking his first Indy 500 win by 2.5 seconds. Mario Andretti, who hadn't won the race himself since 1969, was meanwhile spitting feathers, and Sullivan later recalled that Mario didn't talk to me for a year. The European Cup final took place between Liverpool and Juventus at the Heysel Stadium in Brussels, but now before kick-off there was more crowd trouble. In one end of the ground, Liverpool fans were separated only by a chain-link fence from a neutral area containing mostly Italian and Belgian spectators with families. Several groups of Liverpool hooligans broke through the fence, overwhelmed the tiny police presence, and charged at the Juventus supporters, who fled towards a wall which collapsed. 39 were killed, 32 Italians, 4 Belgians, 2 French and 1 Northern Irish. The city of Brussels declared a state of siege, and the match controversially went ahead, 1-0 win by Juventus. It was the final straw for FIFA. While some of the blame for the tragedy could be laid at the dreadful state of repair of the 55-year-old Heysel Stadium, it was the Liverpool fans who were held solely responsible, and all English clubs were banned from all European football competitions indefinitely, with Liverpool to serve an additional 3 years after the end of that ban, whenever that might be. The most expensive Japanese movie made to date, with a budget of $11 million, opened in Tokyo. Akira Kurosawa's Ran, based on Shakespeare's tragedy King Lear, was only modestly successful, taking just enough domestically to break even, but it was highly critically acclaimed, nominated for 4 Oscars, of which it won 1 for costume design, and is to this day consistently ranked among the greatest movies in the world. Across the Pacific, the first entries in the summer blockbuster season were starting to drop. 1982's First Blood had been a taut thriller about a haunted Vietnam veteran, but now sequel Rambo, First Blood Part 2, was a pure jingoistic action flick, seeing John Rambo sent back to Vietnam to rescue missing prisoners of war. On the same day, Roger Moore's last film as James Bond, A View to a Kill, was released, with the spy, now pushing 60, facing villains Christopher Walken and Grace Jones, who are planning to destroy Silicon Valley. And also released this week was Richard Pryor John Candy comedy Brewster's Millions, in which Pryor's dopey baseball player must spend $30 million in 30 days in order to inherit a $300 million fortune, and Fletch, a neo-noir comedy starring Chevy Chase as a reporter hired to assassinate a millionaire by the millionaire himself. Meanwhile, everyone in the F1 fraternity was looking forward to a return to the Spa-Francorchamps circuit after the successful 1983 race there. The only complaint that anyone had had was that in wet conditions, quite common in the Ardennes, there was a lot of standing water, so the organisers had decided to have the whole circuit resurfaced with a new type of rubberised asphalt, which its manufacturers promised would eliminate aquaplaning and increase adherence in all weathers. Unfortunately, between some rather shambolic Belgian planning and continuously delayed visa inspections, the surface was only just being laid while the F1 cars were tearing around Monaco 2 weeks earlier. One driver who would not be returning was François Hinault. The Frenchman had looked thoroughly dejected in Monaco, after failing to qualify slowest of all except the injured Martini, and had had any remaining confidence completely obliterated by a nasty crash testing at Paul Ricard, which had left him trapped in the cockpit wrapped in catch fencing for some time before anyone had arrived to free him. It being only a test, there were no marshals on duty and only a skeleton staff at the circuit, so it fell to the Brabham team to hop in a car and go and find their driver when he didn't come back round. The unfortunate François retired on the spot, not just from F1, but from motor racing as a whole. He would go on to marry a French heiress and take over the family business. Replacing Hinault in the second Brabham was Marc Surer. The Swiss driver had had a pretty torrid 1984 in the Arrows team, which was a shame after his great 1983. He just couldn't seem to get the hang of the new A9 chassis with the BMW engine, and looked more and more depressed as the season went on. It was a pity, but not really a surprise, when he decided to try his hand elsewhere, racing Porsche sports cars for the Kramer team, for whom he'd won the 1,000 kilometres of Monza in April, co-driving with Manfred Winkelhock. However, his experience with the BMW engine earned him what had always escaped him in the past, an offer from a top team, and he jumped at the chance. As for the rest, Renault had a new lighter chassis for Tombe, Honda had a new longer stroke version of its engine for Williams to try out, Minardi had rebuilt their car and Martini had suffered no ill effects from his Monaco prang, and Lotus were sheepishly admitting that Senna's engine failure in the Principality had been their fault. Ayrton had over-revved the engine in the morning warm-up, but they judged it not to have been damaged and decided not to replace it. And Ken Tyrrell looked happy for a change, with the Renault-powered 014 chassis reportedly being started up for the first time back at the factory this week. Senna had never driven at Spa before and was very noticeably tiptoeing around early on, while Alboreto and Prost, both drivers known for their smooth style, set the early pace. Drivers reported that the new surface was giving fantastic grip in the corners and had bedded down well on the sections of public road, but on the dedicated sections of track it was starting to break up, with ruts beginning to appear through Eau Rouge. Friday afternoon's qualifying sessions saw Senna rapidly get on the pace, Tombe enjoying the new car and Prost in trouble, blowing 3 tag engines during the course of the day and not being able to set a time. Track inspections after Friday's session revealed that the surface was in worse shape than it had appeared from the cockpit, and engineers from the company that had laid the surface, Hydrocar, were called in to do repairs. It took all night, and they were still clearing up when the teams arrived for Saturday morning practice. Senna was out first, followed by the rest, but before long it was obvious something was up. Lap times were nearly 25 seconds slower than yesterday, and the drivers pulled back in and, led by Lauda, collectively announced they would not continue with the surface as it was. Unfortunately, in their eagerness to get it right, Hydrocar had resurfaced the entire track, not just the problematic bits, and the drivers were unable to do what they had done yesterday and go round to find a usable line. And if the previous surface hadn't been ready after 2 weeks, there was no way that tarmac laid last night was going to be ready to race on. After much prodding and poking, rolling and surface treatment, and inspection after inspection after inspection, the inevitable was announced. The Belgian Grand Prix was off. Spectators were offered a full refund, or as an alternative, they could stay on Sunday and watch the Formula 3000 race. It had been decided that while the powerful F1 cars couldn't race, the 400 horsepower, less grippy F3000 cars should be okay. In the end, it was probably just as well, as 6 of the F3000 cars spun off during the 29-lap race, which was won by Mike Thackwell, with Alain Ferté and Christian Danner second and third. So, with the Canadian Grand Prix beginning a 2-race North American leg in 2 weeks' time, the teams all headed off home to get in a bit more development work.